My son told me I had exactly 10 minutes to leave my own birthday party. He said it quietly, the way you'd tell a waiter he brought the wrong wine. He didn't shout. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive bourbon, and said, "Dad, Melissa's family is here. Please don't make this weird." Behind him, through the French doors of the dining room he'd decorated with flowers that cost more than my first car, I could see my daughter-in-law laughing with her father, a man named Gerald who wore his watch on the outside of his shirt cuff, like it was a medal he'd earned in battle. I was holding a casserole dish. Sweet potato, brown sugar, and butter. The dish my late wife Margaret had made every year for my birthday since 1987. The foil was still warm against my palms. I looked at my son Brandon. I looked at the man who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms, who I drove to the emergency room at 2 a.m. when he broke his collarbone trying to jump his bicycle off the garage roof, who I sat beside during every school play, every Little League game, every moment that mattered. He was wearing a suit I didn't recognize. It fit perfectly. I'd never seen him in anything that fit perfectly before. "You're right," I said. "I don't want to make things weird." I walked back to my truck. I set the casserole dish on the passenger seat. I sat behind the wheel for a moment and looked at the house. It was a beautiful house. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, a wraparound porch, a heated driveway. I knew every square foot of it because I had signed the purchase agreement myself through a company called Gaines Property Holdings 3 years ago. Brandon thought he was leasing it from a faceless investment group his accountant had found online. He thought he was sharp for getting such a favorable rate. He paid $600 a month for a house worth $8,000. My name is Walter Gaines. I'm 67 years old. I spent 40 years looking like a man who fixed other people's problems for a living, because that's exactly what I did. I wore the same boots. I drove the same truck. I ate lunch out of the same dented thermos. What I did not do was tell my son that the company I built from the ground up now owned 31 commercial and residential properties across 4 states. I did not tell him that the little office I kept above a dry cleaner's on the east side of town was the headquarters of an operation that cleared $11 million last fiscal year. I didn't tell him because I wanted him to stand on his own 2 feet first. I wanted him to prove he was a man before he knew he was an heir. He had just told me to leave my own birthday party. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in 8 months. His name was Dennis Pruitt, and he was the most methodical man I had ever met. Dennis had spent 20 years as a forensic accountant for the IRS before I hired him away with a salary that made his pension look like a tip jar. He answered on the first ring. "Walter," he said, "you sound calm. That worries me." "It should," I said. "Pull up the Brandon file, all of it. Every account, every lease, every contract with his name attached." Dennis paused. I could hear him typing. "You sure about this?" I looked at the house one more time. Through the window, I could see Brandon refilling Gerald's glass. He was smiling, the smile he practiced, the one he used when he wanted something. "Start the clock," I said. I didn't drive away. I parked 1 block down and watched. My truck had a cracked dashboard and a radio that only worked on AM, but it had a clear line of sight to the driveway. At 6:45, the catering van arrived. At 7, a string quartet set up in the garden, all of it charged to the supplemental business card I had given Brandon for what I called professional development expenses. In the past year alone, he had spent $42,000 on dinners, hotel suites, wardrobe, and a wine club membership. He told himself he was networking. He was actually performing, building a stage set of a life he hadn't earned for an audience of people who didn't love him. My phone buzzed. It was Dennis. "Done," Dennis said. "Everything's queued. I can flip the switch whenever you say." "Not yet," I said. "Let them eat first." The call I made next was to a woman named Patricia, who managed the leasing office for Gaines Property Holdings. I told her to prepare a rent adjustment notice for the house on Sycamore Ridge Lane. She asked what the new rate should be. "Market value," I said. "Full market rate, effective 30 days from today." "That's a significant jump, Walter." "I know," I said. "That's the point. The night finished the way expensive nights always do, a little too loud and a little too empty. At 10:30, the cars began to leave. The string quartet packed up. The caterers loaded their trays. Through the window, I watched Brandon and Melissa walk Gerald and his wife to their car. There was a lot of handshaking. There was a lot of laughter. At one point, Gerald clapped Brandon on the shoulder the way fathers do when they're proud of their sons. I thought about the casserole sitting on my passenger seat, getting cold. I drove home. I lived in a 2-bedroom house in a neighborhood Brandon called Honest, which was his way of saying modest. The floors were original hardwood and some of them creaked. The kitchen had the same tile it had when Margaret and I moved in 30 years ago. My son had suggested more than once that I sell it and move somewhere more appropriate for my age. He meant a retirement community. He meant somewhere out of the way. I sat in my kitchen and ate a bowl of cereal and watched the clock move past midnight. Then I opened my laptop and started making calls. The following morning arrived bright and cold. I was dressed and at the kitchen table by 6:15 with a cup of coffee and a legal pad covered in notes when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Brandon standing on the porch. His tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot. He had the look of a man who had not slept and didn't want to admit why. "Dad," he said. "We need to talk." "Come in," I said. He sat at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the coffee mug I put in front of him. He didn't drink it. He just held it like a life preserver. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Last night. The way I handled it. I shouldn't have done that." I sat down across from him. I looked at my son. I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "What changed between last night and this morning?" I asked. He rubbed his face. "My card got declined at the gas station this morning. Then I tried 2 others. All of them. Nothing. I called the bank and they said there was a hold, some kind of administrative review." He looked up at me. "Do you know anything about that?" "I might," I said. He stared at me. "What does that mean?" "It means I know a great deal about your finances, Brandon. I always have." I set my coffee down. "Did you think the card limit you had was something the bank just gave you?" He frowned. "My company card is issued through the business line. My accountant set it up. Noti, entenzalamen, endonum, proviencidade, endonaman, endonamen, noti HW1. Your accountant works for Gaines Property Holdings," I said. "He always has. I put him in place when you started the firm. I wanted someone I trusted to keep an eye on the books." The color left Brandon's face slowly, the way sunlight leaves a room when a cloud passes over. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying that the business line of credit, the supplemental cards, the favorable lease rate on your office space, the lease on the house on Sycamore Ridge, the company vehicle, the health insurance plan, all of it has run through my organization for the past 4 years." I folded my hands on the table. "You've been drawing a salary from my generosity and calling it success." Brandon's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "I wanted you to build something real," I said. "I gave you scaffolding. I expected you to build a structure. Instead, you built a costume." I paused. "Last night you told me to leave because I didn't fit the image you were projecting. You were right, Brandon. I don't fit it. Because the image isn't real, and I built it." He pushed back from the table. He stood up. The chair scraped loud against the tile. "That's not true. I built my client relationships myself. My reputation. My brand. Your 3 largest clients," I said quietly, "are subsidiaries of companies I hold equity in. I directed that business to you because I wanted to see you grow into it." I looked at him steadily. "Check the incorporation documents if you don't believe me. Dennis can walk you through the structure." Brandon was breathing hard. "You set me up. You made me think I gave you every opportunity," I said. "That's not a setup. That's love. What you did last night, that was a setup. You set me up to be humiliated in front of people who aren't worth the shine on your shoes." He picked up his phone. He was going to call someone. I watched him dial and then watched his face change when the call didn't connect. The phone plan was part of the package. He stared at the screen. "Fix this," he said. His voice had gone tight. "Fix it right now, Dad." I have meetings today. I have a reputation. You have 30 days, I said. That's the notice period on the lease. He looked at me like I'd said something in another language. The lease on what? The house, I said. You've been paying $600 a month on a property with a market rate of $7,400. As of this morning, your rent has been adjusted to fair market value. The notice was delivered by certified mail at 8 a.m. I checked my watch. You've probably got a text from the leasing office already, once the phone service is restored, which will happen this afternoon. I'm not a cruel man. Brandon sat back down. He sat down heavily, the way people do when their legs stop working right. $7,400 a month, he said. Plus utilities, I said. Those were included as a courtesy. The courtesy has expired. He didn't speak for a long time. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The refrigerator hummed. What about Melissa? He asked. She doesn't know any of this. She didn't do anything. Melissa laughed, I said. When you told me to leave, I saw her through the window. He had no answer for that. I walked him to the door. He stood on my porch in the morning, cold, looking smaller than I'd seen him look since he was a boy. He didn't have his car, I realized. He must have walked from around the corner. Either he didn't trust himself to drive, or he hadn't wanted me to see the car in the driveway. Small pride, still operating, in a crisis. What am I supposed to do? He asked. That's the first honest question you've asked me in about 3 years, I said. I don't have an answer for you yet, but I'd suggest you start by finding out which parts of your life belong to you. I closed the door. What happened next, I did not enjoy. I want to be clear about that. There are people who take pleasure in watching someone they love fall apart. I am not one of them. Every action I took in the following 2 weeks, I took with a deliberate heaviness, the way a doctor sets a broken bone. It hurts, because it has to. Because if you don't, it heals wrong. By Wednesday, Brandon's office lease had been reviewed and not renewed. The space was a commercial unit in a building I owned on Meridian Avenue. The official reason was a planned renovation. The real reason was sitting in a booth at a diner on the east side, which is where I happened to be when my phone rang, and it was Dennis again. He found a lawyer, Dennis said. Already? Moved fast. Guy named Stuart Cole. Advertises on late-night cable. He filed a motion this morning claiming you've engaged in financial coercion. He's arguing Brandon had a reasonable expectation of continued support based on your prior conduct. I drank my coffee. What's your read? He's got nothing, Dennis said. But he's making noise. He called the business reporter at the Courier and gave her a tip. She's going to run a story. Let her, I said. Walter, a man with nothing to hide doesn't silence reporters, I said. Let her write what she has. Then she'll call me. And when she does, I'll have a different story to tell. The reporter's name was Carol Hines. She called at 4 that afternoon, and I told her to come by the office, the real office, the one on the 30th floor of the Gaines building, a building whose name was on the plaque out front, but which my son had apparently never connected to his father's name. She sat across from me with her notebook and looked at the view for about 15 seconds before she looked at me. Your son is claiming you deliberately dismantled his career out of personal spite, she said. My son is welcome to that claim, I said. Would you like to see the structure of the investment portfolio I built over 40 years? Or would you prefer to start with the properties? She ended up staying for 2 hours. She called her editor from the lobby on the way out. The story she published 3 days later was not the one Brandon's lawyer had hoped for. Melissa left on a Friday. Not because I asked her to, and not because Brandon asked her to. She left because a woman named Gwen, who was Gerald's second wife and not Melissa's actual mother but who Melissa called Mom anyway, had apparently been on the phone with her for 9 days straight, telling her that a sinking ship was still a ship, and a smart woman knows when to swim. I heard about this secondhand, from Brandon himself, who called me from the parking lot of a Marriott at 11 at night because he had nowhere else to go. She took the dog, he said. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. She said she didn't sign up for this. She said her dad warned her. She said he stopped. She said you ruined everything. Brandon, I said. What did I ruin? Silence on the line. Your card stopped working the morning after you asked me to leave my birthday party, I said. Before that, you had 4 years of everything I could give you. The question isn't what I ruined. The question is what you built during those 4 years that actually belonged to you. More silence. Then, very quietly, I don't know. That's a place to start, I said. He stayed at the Marriott for 3 weeks. I know because I paid for it, though not through any account he had access to. I had Dennis arrange it directly with the hotel, with no connection visible to Brandon. I'm not able to explain that impulse except to say that a father who stops loving his child the moment the child disappoints him was never really loving the child to begin with. I was angry. I was hurt. I was enforcing a consequence that needed to be enforced, but I was still his father. The complication arrived in the form of Gerald. I had underestimated Gerald, which was my own fault. I assumed a man who wore his watch that way was performing, not planning. I was wrong. Gerald was smarter than he looked, and more dangerous than he acted. He had spent 20 years in commercial real estate on the West Coast, not as successfully as he pretended, but successfully enough to know how a motivated buyer could structure a predatory acquisition. And he had spent the 9 days of telephone calls with Melissa not just coaching her toward the exit, but mapping the terrain. Dennis called on a Tuesday morning. Gerald made an offer on the Meridian Avenue property, Dennis said. I stopped. He what? Through a holding company registered in Delaware. They approached the building manager directly, bypassing the leasing office. The offer is 30% below market, all cash, closed in 15 days. They were betting you'd take a quick exit if the terms looked clean. Where did he get my contact information for that building? Dennis hesitated. Brandon signed a document about 6 months ago authorizing a third-party property review for tax purposes. Gerald's LLC was listed as the review firm. I set down my pen. Brandon gave his father-in-law access to my property records. I don't think he understood what he was signing, Dennis said. But yes, I leaned back in my chair. Gerald had seen an opening and moved on it. He wasn't helping his daughter through a divorce. He was positioning himself to pick up assets at a discount from a family in crisis. He was a predator, and my son had handed him a map. Decline the offer, I said, formally, in writing, and pull the full background on Gerald's LLC. I want to know every property they've touched in the last 5 years. What Dennis found was not shocking, but it was useful. Gerald's company had a history of approaching distressed sellers, people going through divorces, business failures, or estate settlements, and making lowball cash offers timed to catch them at their most desperate. 7 of the 9 properties they'd acquired in the past 5 years had been picked up from sellers under legal or financial duress. He wasn't a predator by accident. He was one by design. I made 2 calls. The first was to an attorney named Lawrence, who specialized in real estate law and owed me a favor from a zoning dispute I'd helped him resolve in 2019. The second was to a woman named Sandra, a former colleague who now worked as a forensic investigator specializing in securities and property fraud. I gave Sandra Gerald's LLC name and asked her to start looking. She called back in 48 hours. Your girl intuition about this man was correct, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. He's got 2 active civil judgments against that LLC in California. One from a widow in Sacramento who says he misrepresented the terms of a sale and she lost her home for less than 1/3 of its value. The other is from a family trust executor who claims Gerald's company filed a fraudulent appraisal to depress the price. Both cases are moving slowly, but they're moving. I thanked Sandra and hung up. Then I called Gerald directly. I had his number because he had given it to me at the birthday party, before Brandon asked me to leave, in the way men of a certain type always give you their number when they want to seem significant. He answered on the 3rd ring. Walter, he said. He sounded pleased to hear from me. I've been hoping we'd connect. I imagine so, I said. You made an offer on one of my buildings. A pause. My company made a preliminary inquiry. Yes. I thought it might simplify things for everyone given the current. The current what? I said. Another pause. The current circumstances. Gerald, I said, I want to ask you something directly, and I'd like a direct answer. Did you counsel Melissa to leave Brandon? A long pause this time. I counseled my daughter to protect herself. And the property inquiry was separate from that. Of course. Then you won't mind, I said, if I share the details of the Sacramento judgment with the business reporter at the Courier, who just wrote a very favorable story about my company. She seemed eager for a follow-up piece. Complete silence. I'm not looking for a fight, Gerald, I said. I'm looking for you to stay in your lane. Decline the offer you made. Drop your LLC from the equation entirely and go back to wherever it is you came from. If your daughter needs financial support, that's between you and her. If I find your company's name attached to anything connected to my holdings or my son again, I'll make the Sacramento family's legal fees look like a down payment. He hung up without answering. 3 hours later, Dennis received a written withdrawal of the offer. It was on a gray Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after the birthday party, that Brandon came back. Not the version of Brandon who had stood at the birthday party refilling Gerald's glass. A different one. He knocked on my door at 8 in the morning, and when I opened it, he was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt I hadn't seen in years. His hands looked like they'd been doing actual work. There was something under his fingernails that wasn't gel. I got a job, he said. A real one. Project coordinator for a mid-size construction outfit on the north side. 40 hours a week, health plan, direct deposit. He said it the way people announce something they're proud of, but also a little afraid to jinx. I stood aside and let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, the same one he'd sat at 6 weeks before. I made coffee. He looked around the kitchen, at the same tile and the same creaking floor, and I watched his face do something complicated. I used to be embarrassed by this house, he said. I told Melissa it was where you'd ended up, like it was a defeat. He put his hands flat on the table. I didn't know you owned the building. You didn't ask, I said. I didn't think you had anything I needed to know about. He looked up. That's the part I can't get past. I looked at you and I saw the truck and the boots, and I decided I already knew everything about you. I stopped being curious about who you actually were a long time ago. I poured 2 cups and sat down. Your mother used to say that the most dangerous thing a person can do is decide they already know someone, I said. She said it stops you from actually seeing them. He was quiet for a moment. I miss her. So do I said. Every day. We sat with that for a while. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I'm not here about the money, or the cards, or the lease. I know I don't have a claim on any of that. He stopped and started again. I came because you're my father, and I acted like you weren't. And I need you to know that I know that. I looked at my son. I looked at the flannel shirt and the clean, tired expression of a man who had been sleeping on something hard and waking up early for something real. I thought about the 40 years of work it had taken to build something I could have handed to him. I thought about Margaret, who would have known exactly what to say in this moment, and who would have said it better than I ever could. Tell me about the job, I said. He talked for an hour. He talked about the project manager he worked for, a woman named Denise, who he said was the most organized person he'd ever met, and who had no patience for excuses. He talked about being on a job site and having to learn things he should have known 20 years ago. He talked about being tired in a way that felt different from the tired he'd felt before. He said that tired felt earned. I listened. I didn't offer anything. I didn't promise anything. I didn't reach for the checkbook or mention the trust structure or say anything about what came next. I just listened to my son talk about learning how to work, and I let that be enough for one morning. Before he left, he stopped at the door and looked at the kitchen counter. There was a wooden recipe box sitting beside the coffee maker. Margaret had kept it there for 30 years. It was cedar, hand-carved, and it held 300 handwritten index cards in her slanted cursive, every recipe she'd ever made. Is that Mom's box? He asked. It's always been there, I said. He looked at it the way you look at something you'd been walking past without seeing. I didn't know she wrote them all down, he said. She wrote everything down, I said. She believed that if something was worth making, it was worth remembering. He nodded slowly. He looked like he was thinking about more than recipes. Same time next week? He asked. I could bring breakfast. I'll be here, I said. He left. I stood in the kitchen and listened to his truck start up and pull away from the curb. It wasn't a new truck. It wasn't the leased vehicle he'd turned in when the corporate account closed. It was a used truck, a little loud, a little rough on the cold start. It sounded like something he'd bought with money he made himself. I poured out the last of the coffee and rinsed both cups. 3 months later, I met with my attorney and made 2 changes to my estate documents. The first change removed the clause that had been triggered by the birthday party. The second change added a new condition. Not financial, not property-based. It simply required that the trustee confirm, at the time of distribution, that the heir had held continuous employment in a legitimate capacity for a minimum of 2 years. Not because I didn't trust him, because I loved him enough to make him prove he could trust himself. The Gaines Property Holdings Scholarship Program launched in the spring. 8 students, all of them first generation, all of them studying engineering or construction management, received full funding through their undergraduate degrees. At the small ceremony I hosted at the office, a young woman named Diana, who was from the same neighborhood I'd grown up in, gave a short speech. She talked about what it meant to have someone believe in you before you had a record of accomplishment. She talked about her grandfather, who had worked in a plant for 30 years and never had the chance she was getting. I sat in the back row and thought about my own grandfather, who had died before I was old enough to know him, and who had worked with his hands his whole life and left nothing behind, except the idea that a man who works hard deserves to be taken seriously. I thought about Brandon. I thought about the flannel shirt and the job site and the way he'd looked at Margaret's recipe box. I thought about the fact that the most important things I had ever built were not on any ledger Dennis kept. They were not in any property, portfolio, or corporate filing. They were in the choices I had made on the mornings when I could have taken the easy path and chose instead to take the honest one. They were in the discipline of building something real and the dignity of refusing to let anyone reduce it to a costume. My son had tried to turn my life into a backdrop for his performance. He had tried to make me small so he could look large, and in doing so, he had made himself into something smaller than anything I had ever built. A man living inside a story that wasn't true, surrounded by people who didn't see him either. The performance was over now. What was left was just a man, learning what he was made of. I have lived long enough to know that there is no clean ending to anything that matters. There is no moment where the score is settled and the ledger closes. There is only the ongoing choice to be honest about what you've built and patient about what you hope to see grow. My son is still learning. I am still watching. We have breakfast on Tuesdays now, at my kitchen table, with coffee from the same machine that was there when his mother was alive. He asks questions now. He is curious again, the way he was when he was small. Before he decided he already knew everything. Last Tuesday, he asked me how I'd started. Not how I got rich. How I started. The first property. The first deal. The first time I signed something that meant something. I told him I bought a half-acre lot with $1,100 I'd saved over 2 years by working double shifts and not buying anything I didn't need. I told him the lot was on a floodplain, and everyone told me it was worthless. I told him I waited 4 years, and then the city rezoned the area for commercial development, and I sold it for $12,000. He sat with that for a minute. "You saw something nobody else saw," he said. "No," I said. "I just waited longer than everyone else was willing to wait." He nodded. He looked out the kitchen window at the yard, at the small patch of garden Margaret had kept, which I still tend even now, even though I'm not much of a gardener, and most of what grows out there surprises me. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "Not like an apology you're trying to get through, like the kind that costs you something to say." "I know you are," I said. And then I got up to refill the coffee, and he told me about a problem he was trying to solve on the job site. And I listened. And outside the window, the morning was doing what mornings do, moving forward whether you were ready or not, patient and indifferent, and full of the kind of light that doesn't ask who you used to be.